Ditchable weights, they can save you or send you straight to the decompression chamber, depending on how you use them. I'm Don, with years of diving around the world using both ditchable and non-ditchable setups. I now have clear and practical advice to share. Stay with me here and you'll learn how much weight to carry, where to place it, and exactly when to ditch without risking a runaway ascent. Ditchable weights sound like a simple safety button to get instant peace of mind. But underwater, they can behave like a spring that snaps you from stable to out of control. By some chance, if you had an accidental or self-inflicted ejection of those weights, you could move from neutral buoyancy to strongly positive buoyancy very fast. Your ascent can snowball faster than the recommended 30 feet or 10 meters per minute. As you rise, gas in your BCD or suit also expand, which increases buoyancy and accelerates you even faster. And you'll have to remember to vent really fast on your way up. That fast acceleration risks lung overexpansion injury and decompression sickness, the two things that comprise of decompression illness, or rather DCI. And this is the opposite of the safety that you intended with your detachable weights. The core issue is, can I stay in control while having positive buoyancy? If you pull one handle and dump too much ballast at depth, you remove the resistance that lets you steer with small breaths and tiny BCD dump valve pulls. The real myth here is that if something goes wrong, just drop it all. In fact, underwater, dropping everything can swap one emergency for another, creating a rocket ascent and a one-way ticket to the local decompression chamber. This might be needed if drowning is a real threat, because honestly, DCS is less of a risk than drowning. So one problem for another. But honestly, a lot of things have to go really wrong before you get to the point of drowning. We as scuba divers do a lot of training to make sure that is never a risk. And so for you to need to depend on ditching those weights to prevent drowning should be the lowest probability possible. Your goal is to never blast to the surface. You only want to become only slightly positive. If you must ditch, so you can still ascend near that 30 feet or 10 meter per minute guidance. The decision to ditch needs to be a clear rule that you can call even while under stress. And that decision tree should be something like, am I going to drown if I cannot reach the surface immediately? If the answer is yes, then ditch your weight. You might get decompression sickness, but that is still less risk than drowning. And you need to make sure you're constantly exhaling as you're ascending as well, because the gas in your lungs will continue to expand. So DCS can be survivable. Drowning cannot be. So you take your life in the hands of a gamble, but you must survive the drowning. Otherwise, beyond that decision tree, you should not resort to ditching weight and explore other options instead. Dan, or Divers Alert Network, does support ditchable weight in their emergency plan because their incident reviews show out of air emergencies is a leading driver to fatal accidents, and failure to ditch weights appears repeatedly in their case data. So if you really are in an out of air emergency, you ditch the weights. Take your chances and continue to exhale. What's unfortunate is a lot of divers in those out of emergencies are not ditching their weights. So if you have ditchable weights, it's important to practice using them under those scenarios. Also, at the surface or when out of air, Dan also advises dropping weight to establish positive buoyancy because staying afloat beats the risk of sinking every time. There's also rescue divers, which if they come to save you and pull you to a shore, they're also trained to ditch your weight as well. And if you have ditchable weight, it makes you easier to get to shore. But there is a big difference between ditching your weight accidentally or intentionally and rocking surface, or ditching your weight enough to establish positive buoyancy and getting to the surface safely under control. That is why divers generally carry a small, deliberate detachable reserve so we can get slightly positive when it counts without turning into that rocket. We'll get more into those options here shortly, but with Dan advising ditchable weights, it's important to remember their stance in further discussion. So if your decision tree is drowning and you ditch your weights, that's entirely a good thing. But the important thing here is a lot of things have to go wrong before you get to that decision tree. And trying to make sure you never have to make that decision is part of diving safely. Let's look at that next. Most divers start heavier than necessary because it guarantees the first ascent, even with nerves. Maybe you're not breathing or you can't quite exhale fully, maybe a little nervous, new suits, having trouble getting all the air out of your BCD, maybe it's rental gear, who knows? There's so many things that's just making it harder to descend than if you were relaxed. So the solution often is, especially if you can't weight yourself, is for other people to help you. Here's another weight. Take this one. Here's more weight. Let me just shove more weight on you until you get down. The hidden bill of that arrives during the dive because extra lead requires more BCD gas to compensate, which makes a bigger profile and more drag. More drag means more effort, more gas consumption, and shorter dives. And it can turn a smooth glide into a tiring swim. Overweighting also shifts trim, pitching you head up or feet down, so you constantly correct rather than relax into a flat, efficient posture. And of course, this posture problem makes your kicks push you upward instead of forward, which wastes energy and stirs up silt. It's like the classic beginner diver look. You will feel the penalty at the safety stop when you bounce instead of hovering relaxed, because you're fighting both buoyancy, swing, and posture. So if you're watching this video, one of the things I really want to get across is to understand weighting yourself and understanding how much to weight yourself. Because then you are empowered to make the judgment calls on your own and make better decisions instead of people just making decisions for you. Those decisions may be in your best interest to help you learn scuba diving, but they're not the best decisions for you to be as safe as possible. And it's not anyone's fault. Often for dive professionals, it's hard to deal with classes of big sizes. It's hard to teach everyone in a proper way to weight themselves. So I'm hoping this video, if it finds you and you're overweighted, I'm hoping it helps you set a better course of being able to weight yourself. It is completely normal for newbie beginners to be overweighted, and it's one of the biggest things that should be corrected. So please pay attention. 10% of your body weight, which ignore critical variables like exposure, suit thickness, cylinder material, your body composition, and salinity. For example, I'm a pretty heavy dude. If I did 10%, I would just be incredibly overweighted. I'm not positively buoyant. If I just jump into water, I will sink straight to the bottom. If, I'm putting 10% on, just imagine I'm adding weight to weight. It's important to note that fat is more positively buoyant and muscle is negatively buoyant. So based on your body composition, that 10% rule can swing really heavily. So it's a rule of thumb. That's all it is. It's a beginner's step to diving. They're general rules of thumbs to ballpark, but from there, it takes skill to figure out what exactly you need. A proper buoyancy check beats guesses, and it keeps you honest if your kit or environment changes, which is going to change all the time in your diving career. But before we talk about too heavily on fixing it, I also want to just pound in that extra lead can mask skill gaps because it feels stable until you need to control a slow ascent with breathing alone. For example, if your BCD inflation fails at depth and you carry too much lead, you're more likely to consider a big ditch, which is where the problems settle in. While if you're weighted almost just right, maybe you don't need a ditch at all. In fact, in many cases, you don't need a ditch. The goal is to fix the root cause instead. Carry only the weight you need, not more, and place it where you're balanced, so you don't need a huge bubble in your BCD. Which, fun fact, while you're diving, you can generally see how properly weighted someone is based on their safety stop, based on how much gas you see in their BCD. You really don't need much at the safety stop, so it should be nearly empty. So if it's quite full, you're probably overweighted. But in this video, I don't want to dive too deep into achieving perfect weighting, as I have another dedicated video here for you to check out next. It goes into much more detail about achieving that perfect weighting. I just want you to know in this one that it's a thing, and there's this concept of trying to achieve a balanced rig where you nail your weighting and you're not too heavy nor too light via weight checks. And I feel I would just repeat all the same things I said in that video in this one, so check that one out after this video. It will help smooth out those concepts a lot more. But some of the most common reasons divers are often overweight is because of a change they forgot to account for: a thicker wetsuit, a different tank or cylinder, switching from freshwater to saltwater, or adding a camera tray, or adding a heavy dive torch can push a number off by a kilo or more. The antidote is a quick verification habit and a small deliberate adjustment rather than a big nervous shove of extra lead into your pockets. When you get the number right, your breathing gets quieter, your kicks get smaller, and your dive gets longer with the same gas. But the key is to be able to judge after those configuration changes how much weight you need, where it is, and being able to test if you have proper weighting via a pre-dive weight check and post-dive weight check to verify that your rig is balanced for you. And this isn't adjusting for ditchable weights, it's just how much total weight you need. And so the goal would be to prevent rocketing up if you do need ditchable weight. If you have a balanced rig, you really don't need ditchable weight. So it's kind of more of a safety blanket. But if you do want a safety blanket, and that's a personal choice, then you can decide how much. But it shouldn't be all of your weight. Because honestly, I also want to point out that ditchable weight can be a failure point. I have seen, especially new beginner divers, and also experienced divers, now I'm thinking about it, accidentally eject your weight through maybe the mechanism that's holding the weighting in fails, or it wasn't pushed in all the way at the beginning of the dive. Whatever the reason, the weight ejects on the dive, and it's a freaky experience for everyone involved. It could be dangerous. So it is a failure point. And so if it does fail, you don't want it to be all your weight. So the goal would be figuring out how much weight should be ditchable if you want the safety blanket. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. But if you're enjoying this video, now is a great time to like and subscribe. It helps my channel grow and it helps others see this video and hopefully make better decisions with their ditchable weight. I post weekly content to help divers grow their skills, build confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And by the way, I have a newsletter monthly that goes over the latest and greatest scuba news and is free. Feel free to check it out in the description below if you're interested. As I alluded to, you have more options than a single heavy belt, and spreading that ballast intelligently changes everything about control and comfort. Integrated weight pockets on mini BCDs distribute load across your torso, reduce belt pinch, and keep the rig tidy at the surface and underwater. These are still ditchable too. Many models hold around 4 to 6 kilograms or 9 to 13 pounds per side, but designs vary. So check your manual and dry practice the quick release until it is automatic. Also make sure you fully understand how to insert it and really check the conditions of those things, especially if it's a rental, because I just have seen really shitty conditions with rentals. And be sure to check that quick release very thoroughly as well. They wear out over time and I've seen them fail more times than I would like. And as I mentioned, it's a terrifying experience for everyone involved. And then there are trim pockets, which are generally put on your cylinder cam bands. And this allows you to move and displace weight up or down, and it helps really with your trimming. And thus they're generally called trim pockets. But because they're on the back of your cylinder, they're non-ditchable. So they're good places to place some of your weight, if not all of your weight, depending on how much ditchable you would like. The cam band weights shift ballast closer to your center of mass, which reduces the pendulum effect that you feel when your BCD bubble shifts. If you have a backplate in wing, there's the backplate, which is also a nice place to put weight because it's right next to your spine, but of course that's non-ditchable. So you can kind of use your backplate and your fixed trim pockets on your cam band. You can also put those on your waist. You have different options, but you can kind of put them in different places, but they're generally not ditchable. So you get into this game of moving ditchable to non-ditchable fixed weight. The trade-off is obvious. Non-ditchable weights require you to think about where to place your ditchable weights with some kind of balance between ditchable and non-ditchable. Releasable weight systems can include a variety of options. There's of course some things that we mentioned, like the BCD pockets, your weight belt, and there's also weight harnesses that kind of form this X, and you'll have a harness just underneath your BCD that have pockets with weights in them as well that can be ejected. And those are generally helpful if belts make you feel uncomfortable. And in general, since they're right here, they're generally easier to release and a little bit more controlled and rub against other things too for ejection. Not to mention, it's not a bad spot for center of gravity in terms of where they're at. So now I've kind of alluded to it, but let's discuss that fixed weight has a safety upside that is easy to overlook and makes it very hard to create a rocket ascent by mistake, and you cannot dump it all in one motion. That upside doesn't mean you need to remove all of your ditchable weight. You could still have a small ditchable reserve. That is why a hybrid approach is effective. Keep enough ditchable to make a gentle floater if everything else fails, and keep the rest fixed as non-ditchable. The only exception that I'm thinking is maybe with some boat dives when you're trying to get into a rib or dinghy. You will have to pass up your gear to the boat driver, in which if all of the weight is with your cylinder and BCD, it might be a little heavy for the boat driver. And so in those cases, it might be nice of you to spare them bringing up all your weight and shifting some of it to like a weight belt or something that will stay on your person. Take your weights off any way that you can, hand those up, and then they get the cylinder and BCD after. But that is, an aside, is a nice thing for the boat driver rather than a safety consideration for your dive. So that's the only exception I can think of from my own experiences diving across the world. But generally, keeping most of your weight as fixed is often more desirable with only just a small amount as ditchable. So for example, if I needed, let's say 6 kilograms, maybe I make 1 or 2 kilograms into my ditchable pockets. Maybe my BCD pockets, maybe I put on my weight belt. I have options, or rather maybe it could be 6 to 10 pounds, and maybe I put 2 or 4 pounds into my ditchable, or it could even be 1 or 2 pounds. You often don't need much, because if you have a balanced rig, you could, if you wanted to, go with no ditchable weight. But that is a choice. It is a choice. If you prefer to keep ditchable weights, the best thing is to go with just a small amount as possible to get that positive buoyancy. And what's nice is, because you have less weight in those ditchable weight pockets, even if they do eject, it won't be a super emergency as if all your weight ejected. And also, if you have less weight in those pockets, generally it's less wear and tear. Like those ditchable pockets, especially in BCDs, they're generally on your belly, and just with a lot of weight over time, the buckles and stuff just get strained. So if you have less weight in there, less strain, they'll last longer and present less safety risk and hopefully breaking on you on the worst possible time. So something to keep in mind. You can still have ditchable weight, just much less than you probably are using or have been using if you've been using ditchable weight. Let's also clear up some redundancy myths, because some tools are not the fast rescue people imagine. A lift bag or DSMB can create positive buoyancy, but deploying one and relying on it in depth is a skill. It takes time and can itself cause an uncontrolled ascent if you ride it up. You can't just deploy your safety sausage and ride it straight to the surface. Treat it as a signaling tool and an ascent support tool, not your primary buoyancy backup. A dry suit can control buoyancy, but it requires also practice. And it is not an emergency lift plan for a diver who is already out of control. Each of these choices is a lever, and your job is to set the lever so you cannot make a single panic move that takes away ascent control. Okay, let's dive a little bit deeper on finding the appropriate amount of ditchable weight. There is no universal number because your buoyancy is a system built for your body, your gear, and your water. Start by acknowledging that muscle and bone are denser than fat. So two divers of the same height and mass can need very different ballast. Recognize that your cylinder also matters because it changes weight as you breathe the gas out, and that swing shows up mostly at the end of your dive. An aluminum 80, the common 12-liter cylinder or 80 cubic foot aluminum, is slightly negative when full and becomes positive when you're empty. The only reliable answer with so many factors is to test, and the fastest test is the end of dive buoyancy check that takes 1 minute. Knowing how much should be ditchable is the next. Of course, I won't tell you something artificial here like a percentage of your total weight that you're carrying. It's actually much more nuanced than that. You'll understand better if your rig is balanced, so be sure to watch the video I mentioned earlier. Generally, with balanced rigs, many diver pros don't carry ditchable weights, as I've been mentioning, especially for recreational diving. However, it is worth mentioning there are some technical divers with multiple cylinders, and sometimes they will be extra negative. As long as you have one cylinder to breathe off of, you can ditch a cylinder and get positive buoyancy. So it's just worth noting if you're out there rescuing a tech diver, or if you're a tech diver and you need to consider ditching something, you can actually ditch cylinders. So I'm sure you already know that, or if you are rescuing a technical diver, that's an option. Cylinder is ditchable weight. But regardless, generally, those cylinders are pretty heavy, especially when filled with gas. However, intentional ditchable weight, being BCD pockets, those torso pockets, or weight belts, can be that safety blanket I mentioned earlier. To that end, not much needs to be ditchable at all. Just enough that if you're at the start of your dive and your BCD fails at depth, you could get enough positive buoyancy to get you to the surface. You could test this with a kind of pseudo weight check, but you're basically deciding how much ditchable weight you want. So what is a good way? You could go ahead and take a weight belt and hold on to it, start your dive. It's ideal if you have a pool. If not, ideally you can put something down and it's not going to silt up and you're going to lose it immediately. You'll put something down on the ground, and that's going to be a weight belt with maybe some weight in it, and you should be able to let it go and start feeling yourself not rocket to the surface, but gently float up. And you could fin back down and grab your weight belt. This is kind of an appropriate amount of weight that now you've established positive buoyancy. You are naturally floating up. That is a pretty good condition. Make sure you don't have any air in your BCD or your dry suit, and you're just naturally, slowly floating up uncontrolled. You could fin down if you still need to, but you've established positive buoyancy. That's all you really need. So that turns out to be only 2 to 4 pounds or 1 to 2 kilograms at most for many. It's often far less than you think you need. I'd wager something feels off if you're looking at over 10 pounds or 5 kilograms as ditchable, but is situational. So importantly, I want you to be able to be your own judge and make the right decisions. Keep in mind, a well-balanced rig can potentially have 0 ditchable weight, but it's still a personal choice again. Regardless, a partial ditch should make you slightly positive so you can swim and control your ascent rather than becoming a passenger on a fast elevator to the surface. Even a catastrophic and accidental ditch should be controllable. So the most important factors is weighting yourself properly and deciding if you want ditchable weight and how much ditchable weight you need. And it doesn't need to be that much. The important thing is to spend some time and effort to figure out the balanced rig. I'm not telling you to give up on ditchable weight, but once you are able to balance your rig as a skill, not just a one-time effort, set it and forget it, but truly be able to fine-tune and lock in your weighting over the course of several dives, you enable yourself to go with a low amount of ditchable weight or even none at all. Having so little weight can be truly a freeing experience as a diver, and it's one of the skills that made diving enjoyable for me personally. Not to mention, it's a lot safer and relaxing. A win-win in my boat. To learn about balanced rig, check out this video here. And I have a nice complement to it about where to position weight and learn about trim here. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.